Welcome to LockdownCX 2, the second in the LockdownCX series that is specifically focused on law firms and understanding some of the challenges that have come about as a result of the coronavirus and the resulting lockdown, because that's changed what clients feel and what they need. I will be your host for this session, and my name is Clare Fanner, and I am a marketing expert who is dedicated to supporting the legal sector and working with law firms. In this particular session, I'm talking to Sandra Johnson, who is an expert in emotional intelligence. Sandra has some fascinating messages to share with us and things to make us think about as far as how emotional intelligence can impact on a client and the things that we can do as law firms to actually engage with them and help them and support them in better ways. So I'm going to jump straight in. Unfortunately, due to a failing on my part, I didn't record the original introduction that I made to Sandra for the webinar, so I've actually just recorded this to add the video to upload it to YouTube and share it with you. So apologies for that omission. However, most importantly, I recorded pretty well all of Sandra's session other than her introducing herself at the very beginning. So apologies for that. Sandra is the only qualified emotional intelligence coach in the UK, having just achieved that accolade this week from the Daniel Goleman coaching program. There are only 35 such coaches across the world, so it's an absolute pleasure and a privilege to have Sandra speaking to us today. Enjoy. There's some fascinating content that she's going to share with you now, and then you'll hear me quizzing her as the session goes on, and indeed interacting with all the different delegates that turned up, of whom there were many. Enjoy the session. Here we go.
Interactive, so please do send through your questions. Use the chat if you feel that you'd like to just make some comments and stuff. I want to start out though with the point around emotion, because I think that emotion is often misunderstood. I'm going to show you a slide in just a moment, but I would like you to think about two different scenarios just to kind of kick us off. If you had a call put through to you and the person who's putting the call through to you, who's actually a customer, describes the customer as angry, how do you feel? What's going on for you when that anticipation of putting that customer through to you? How do you feel when someone says, I've got an angry customer here, I'm going to put them through to you? Anyone would like to share what they're thinking on that? Apprehensive, thank you, Paul. Anyone? Bracing yourself, nervous, thank you, Sophie. Concerned, great, thank you guys. And if instead, thank you Marina, that's brilliant. So if instead the person putting the call through to you said that this customer felt anxious, how might you feel instead? So rather than angry, they felt anxious. You'd need to reassure them, you'd feel anxious back. Concerned, thinking empathetically, compassionate, happy to reassure. Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. The reason why I brought this up is because the language we use and the way that we expect emotion to be is often around the language we hear, some of the facial expressions we see. And emotional intelligence is around not only understanding the emotion within yourself and being able to manage it, it's about also interpreting the emotions from others. So when you have that self-awareness, you're far more able to understand what's going on with others. And we can see already through just a change of one word, how it brings a different emotion in each of us. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to share my screen. And I'd like to introduce you to a cheeky little disc of different emotions. And I think one of the key things that I've learned on this Daniel Goleman course is that the emotion that you're presented with, or the emotion that you feel within yourself, may not be the real thing that's going on. So if we think about anger just for a second, when we start to unpick what anger is, if we look at this particular circle here, it's because in many cases we're feeling threatened. Sometimes it's a lack of control, and it's around something that is often a threat to our existence. So if we understood that when people present themselves as angry, it's not a thing for us, it's not a direct personal thing, it's through a bunch of feelings they're having themselves, that might actually be helpful to us to ask some questions to help us relate to them. So I guess my question to you is, how conscious are you of the emotions that show up in your own body? And one of the things that I've learned in the Daniel Goleman course is to just give myself some time to make the choice between responding and reacting. Some of the things around reacting means that we do things that we probably will regret. We create a scenario where an individual may not trust us as much as we might like them to. When we react, sometimes it damages a relationship. If we take a moment to choose to respond, we will know that we've made a choice on how we're showing up. So I wonder if anyone would like to share perhaps any examples they have where they've chosen to respond and how that's actually turned out to be a bit different. I can certainly tell you that with some coaching that I've done, I remember one particular situation where someone said something and I realized that I was triggered. It had brought me back to something that I didn't feel confident or very positive about. But by just taking a moment and thinking about what that emotion was and where it came from, meant that I was much more able to respond rather than just react in a way that wouldn't be helpful. So let's just have a little look at the Q&A that's going on here. Now we've got some other comments around the angry and anxious. Let's have a little look here. Will you be able to share these screens? Yeah, absolutely. So Rich, thank you. I've learned to respond and not react. For me, it is a criticism. Okay, great. So when we think about giving people feedback, when we think about receiving feedback, how do we know that actually the way that we're presenting ourselves is productive for the other person? So that's one thing I wanted to talk about, was about emotions and how well we know them. One little saying that I've been taught recently is name it to tame it. And we've talked about this before around something called emotional granularity. And I think that often the reasons why people are unable to talk about emotions is because they don't know how to. So what I'd like to invite you to do, if you'd like to, if you feel comfortable with this, if you have a piece of paper in front of you, I'd like to invite you to write down potentially a positive emotion you felt this week or maybe this morning. If you just make a note of that, and then I'll talk you through what we might do. So one of the things that, as I've said, that helps us talk about emotion is to equip people with a technique that helps to create that conversation. So if I said to you that this morning I'm feeling courageous, I'll explain to you I feel courageous because I'm going to be showing you a number of statistics that support the point around emotion intelligence. And I'm also going to try out some new interactive things because I'm thinking, do you know what? The best way to learn is to do. So with you guys thinking about your positive emotion, if you have had a moment to make a note of it, perhaps you might like to share it. No pressure if you don't, but if you'd like to write that positive emotion in the chat, that would be all good. Grateful, thank you, Sophie. Driven, that's brilliant. We'd love to know a bit more about that one, thank you. Optimistic. Fantastic. So we can see already relieved. Thank you, Clive. So again, we can see that just from the use of one word, we can start a conversation about how we're feeling. And the interesting thing that I'm asking businesses now is, do you know what? When we think about how you measure performance, you're measuring a net promoter score, you're measuring your KPIs. When are you measuring how your staff feel? When are you actually checking in with what the mood of the day is? So there's a difference between emotion and mood. The emotion is fleeting, the mood is more long lasting. And as we can see from some work that's been done even by a company called Team Mood, there are all sorts of technologies now, or even just simply putting something up on a spreadsheet that can monitor how people have felt generally during that day. And that's hugely helpful for many organizations because they're gauging the temperature of the emotion, which then they can dig a bit deeper and find out what is it that's causing this blip, this wave of frustration within a particular part of the business. So again, just another thing to think about as far as bringing emotion into the business. Now, something specifically I'd like to share with you is why you would even bother with emotional intelligence. And this is from research that I've done within the legal profession. So this is all about law firms. And it is being proven that emotionally intelligent lawyers are more productive. They are able to focus and concentrate, and they can switch between different types of cases much more easily than those lawyers that do not have a high EQ score. They're able to get and keep more clients. So that ability to build rapport, to build emotional connection. Now, there's lots of things written about the power of emotional connection and the fact that when you have not just rapport, but something deeper than that, a kind of chemistry going on where you understand what people are about, what they stand for, that you're able to have more loyalty. You're far more effective at listening, and you're much better at communicating. Again, thinking just a moment to the use of language, the choice between using the word angry or anxious, how you present yourself all communicates. And this is the point around verbally and non-verbally, and particularly right now when we're in a position where people are in remote positions, you can see certain things from their faces, but very often, increasingly, we're emailing, we're using Slack, we're using other technologies where actually this is non-verbal comms, because ultimately you're putting a tone onto what you're saying. You're using certain language. And in actual fact, when you're showing your face, what other things can you read? What can you tell from the posture? What can you tell from the attention on the screen? Can you pick up on what we're calling micro expressions? So these are the expressions that come from the unconscious, which are fleeting, but when you're attuned, you can pick that stuff up. And finally, there's the point around reaping the revenues. And I have got some numbers here that I'd like to show you on that. Constantly, people will say to me, do you know, that's lovely. Yes, emotional intelligence is lovely, but you know, it's just too difficult. And I have a hypothesis on that. I have a feeling that people who think things are emotional have in their memory experiences of extreme emotion that may have been quite difficult or hard, when in fact emotions can be deep joy, happiness. They can be excitement, they can be exhilaration. When I'm thinking of people buying houses, you know, of course, I've bought a couple of properties, I was anxious, but then I was hugely excited. You know, people drawing up partnership agreements for new businesses, again, the excitement. And then, of course, the more negative stuff, potentially around divorce or other types of perhaps family law, wills and stuff like that. So from a number of different references, what's been proven is that emotional intelligence can bring about an increase in client retention. And this isn't just keeping clients, this is about keeping good clients, because the stats are showing anything between, and this is the purpose of the good versus the kind of mediocre type loyal customers, between 25 and 85% increase in profits over a lifetime. That's pretty big. This one is also quite interesting and more recent than the Duncan paper, but an 8% increase in an hourly rate premium in law firms and 33% higher profits per partner and 39% higher client retention. So again, different numbers there, but the fundamentals are the same. While these are soft skills, this is hard cash. Now, these particular examples I'm going to share with you, a couple of you may have seen a couple of these before, but I think it does no harm to reiterate these points, because I know that as businesses, it's critically important to be thinking about this profitable sustainability. But I want to change the conversation around this being fluffy stuff that isn't required. It's absolutely the case that at L'Oreal, I mean, this is some years ago now they did this study, but I think that they have a longitudinal study where I can actually get that stuff for you. You know, people who have EQ or EI are making $91,000 more than those people who have lower emotional intelligence scores. And again, I apologize for all of the words here, but this is around, there are fewer formal grievances. There are people who are making less, they're making fewer, there are fewer accidents, there are fewer issues, there's better understanding, and again, general productivity, how you use your time is increased quite substantially too. And finally, this point around progression. We all know, don't we, the people who we like working with. We think about those people who we really look forward to that meeting, and we have those where we perhaps, a little bit more tricky, not quite sure what's going on. We work with them, but it's a little bit eggshell, or perhaps we're not quite sure how to deal with their temperament. People who have EI will do better as far as promotion is concerned, because they have the ability to influence, they have the ability to have that self-awareness, to show up in the right way. And I think, these stats are obviously based quite a bit around money, but I'm hoping that bringing it back to business planning, how businesses operate, it makes it far less of a soft skill and far more of a kind of hard fact. I'd like to invite some questions at this stage, just see what you've got for me before I kind of send you into another flurry of information. Anyone have any questions at this stage they'd like to ask? Okay, let's move on. I want to talk to you about some of the more well-being aspects of Victoria, let me come to that. So is there a questionnaire we can complete to measure our EI? Well, yes, there is. So there are a number of different methodologies. The one that I took is something called the ESCI. So the acronym is EISC. You can do that with the Goleman guys. The interesting thing about that is that it's a mixture of hard data and qualitative verbal kind of responses, which makes it quite a nice blend to help you understand the what and the why. The other interesting thing about that is that the actual result that you get is placed within all of the responses that they've had across the many years that they've run it. So they place you in whether it's in the norm for your type of sector, for your kind of geography. So it's a little bit more specific. I can certainly send you some details through. There are some online quizzes, which in fact I get my students to populate. But they, in many cases, they're a bit more humorous than serious. So certainly I can send some details on to you. So just on this point of health and well-being, and certainly one of the biggest things that I've noticed in the training that I've had is my ability to focus. Time and again, particularly in the work that I do with clients, they talk about distraction and not being able to get the enormity of work done. And in actual fact, Claire and I had a bit of a discussion around multitasking before we came on air. I was saying, you cannot multitask. It's not possible. What you're doing is you're switching. Your brain it can't do that. You're asking it to switch. So when you are multitasking hugely, it's a bit tiring, right? So anyway, off of that subject for a second, but there's an interesting fact around taking breaks. So if you can imagine, the workday well, certainly in some cases, not all, but the workday often consists of, I'm going to work this many hours, then I'm going to have a bit of a lunch break, and then I'm going to crack on. Well, the science says that it's better for you to take more frequent, shorter breaks, because that actually enables you to get into a rhythm of taking a rest, making sure that you're able to separate out, because working in such a focused way for such a long period of time and then taking such a long break, it's not as effective. So the other point to make is that in these short, potentially 15-minute breaks, or however many you are able to take, do different things. There's a correlation between taking a walk, doing a crossword, maybe walking a dog, being out in nature, doing something that is completely different. Baking a cake, you can't bake a cake in 15 minutes, but I'm hoping that you'll get the idea that by doing very many different things within those each 15-minute breaks is far better for you from a sustainable and relaxing and stress relieving way. Oh, thank you, Claire. You can with a microwave, of course. What was I thinking? The other thing I'd like to cover off is this point around ignoring or avoiding certain emotions. People ask me, I just don't want this emotion. I just want it to go away. I'm like really trying not to think about it. And increasingly the science is saying it is much better for you to acknowledge it. Say, I'm feeling that fear, or I'm feeling that anxiety, but to breathe into it, or to take steps to turn the volume down. If you can imagine that you're driving a bus and some of these emotions come on board, so you've got joy and delight, and then you've got anxiety and fear, they're all going to come on the bus, but you can choose where they sit. You can put anxiety and fear right at the back and ask them just to be quiet. They're not going to go away, because in fact, when you concentrate on trying to avoid, guess what happens? It then escalates and becomes bigger than anything else. So that's just another point to come across, where if you're dealing with clients, who are embarrassed or don't want to talk about the emotions that they have, they're not going to go away. They're going to be there. So acknowledging them in someone, but then talking about some of the positive aspects, means that might change their frame of reference. So the other thing that I'd like to invite you to do is to think about how you recharge. What do you do to actually give yourself a boost of energy? What kind of things do you do with your time in order to give yourself? Okay, thank you, Sophie. So coffee in the garden, that sounds like bliss. You go to the gym, fantastic. So we've got 3 boys in this house who have converted the garage into a gym. It's all cracking on. You take a walk, use the time to meditate, great. Walking, sitting in the sun, skipping. Wow, well done, Wayne, that sounds great. Gardening, spending an hour on the sunbed, mindfulness, going for a run, great. So already I'm seeing quite a variety of things. And I think the great thing about our brains is that if we can mix it up, it helps us to recharge, to reconnect. The other point to make is that with emotional intelligence, it's best to keep repeating what you do, even small things. Just keep repeating those small things. So if you decide that you're going to respond rather than react, just keep thinking about it during the day with every situation that kind of comes up. And actually, punishing yourself for not having done some exercises is no good. Just let that go. And just as long as you can do one thing, just one thing each day, would be hugely helpful. Another area I'd like to talk about is some of the things that come up in the legal sector for law firms, and from a brain perspective, why these things come up. So I'm aware, because I'm reading more about it, where there is often complaints from customers or clients who feel like they haven't been kept in contact with, or they've not been communicated with, or they feel like they've been kept in the dark. Now, the thing with that is that we have 2 things going on. In the absence of any information, we make stuff up because our brain can't cope with the fact that there is a gap. It means that we're not as much in control. Another thing that's going on, which is from our ancestry, is that we are bound by something called negativity bias, which means that we're more likely to think that things are negative sooner than think things are positive. Now, whenever I have clients and I ask them to plot up on the wall all of the brilliant customer experiences they've had, they'll write a few. But when I say, tell me about the terrible things that happened, I mean, you can imagine there are more post-its on that wall than whatever. We're wired that way because historically we needed to keep an eye on the environment. We needed to be able to protect ourselves. We kind of thought everyone was an enemy or foe before we could trust them. It's a survival instinct. So when you think that it's okay to get in contact with your client when you have some news, I'm afraid that's not how it works. If you think at the moment around remote working, one of the key themes that's coming up in remote working is something called over communication. So while you might think that you're saying too much and you're sending them too many messages, it actually is super important, because just even telling a customer we're on it, it's all okay, will mean that their brain will calm down. It means that they won't be calling you, ringing you, that they won't be texting you, they won't be emailing you constantly to get an update, because they just know that you're on it. So I really believe that some of the complaints that come in to legal firms are often around us not thinking about how we might feel if we treated someone in a particular way that actually we wouldn't accept ourselves. I'm sure as human beings, I certainly don't like that whole vacuum. And there's a saying, isn't there, called nature abhors a vacuum. So if we think that actually we haven't heard from someone, we instantly think something is wrong. We instantly think that we've not done something, or there's a problem. So again, just think about that communication and keeping in touch with people. It would be great. Let's have some questions from you guys. I could feel like I could talk for several hours, but I'd really like to hear some questions from you guys.
Don't be shy. Can I ask you one? Oh no, there's one there from Vicky. I'll let you deal with that one.
Yeah. So there are some amazing firms who are looking after staff and clients during. How would you approach a management board where they have been furloughed, half the workforce, including the HR function? So it's interesting. Thank you for the question, Vicky. There's a couple of things I'd like to throw in to the ring. I've done now probably 6 webinars for companies where their staff are furloughed to keep the engagement going. So of course, you need to have their permission, because technically this isn't work. This is about creating what they would call a virtual coffee. So this is ensuring that they are doing the best they can to keep people connected, so that they don't feel that worry about, well, I've been furloughed, I've been put over here, I'm going to be forgotten about. So I think one company does it once a month. A couple of others actually did it once every 2 weeks. It's optional. So you offer up an hour, which is a virtual coffee, and you can have a guest speaker talk about something interesting. Do you know what? It could be about gardening. It could be about running. It could be about whatever. However that is, you invite them to be part of this. And the other thing that I know is that some of the clients that I've been speaking to, they send out a really short survey just to say, how are you doing? It seems so simple, right? But from that, you get a whole bunch of stuff. If they feel safe, and that's another topic, but if they feel confident enough just to say, do you know what, this is a nightmare. I've got to homeschool my child, or I'm feeling disconnected. I'm feeling anxious about what will happen in the future. So inviting people to tell you how they're feeling, just even as a short survey that they can either opt into answering or not, I don't know legally whether that even counts as work. I don't know what you've got a feeling on that, Claire. Are communities allowed? Certainly the people I've worked with, they've been keeping in contact with their staff.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Absolutely, yes, they can. Keeping in touch for welfare is an obligation. You're still an employer, but you can't expect them to do any work. Got a couple of other cracking questions. Shall I read them out to you so you can focus on your responses? How can leaders exhibit empathy through these times, except by saying in emails that they care?
It's empathy is a really interesting one, because actually my experience of this is if they are able to give a bit more of themselves. So the thing with empathy is that you attempt, because obviously you come with your own set of biases and your own lenses, but you attempt to try and understand how someone else is feeling, to get into their shoes. My question is, do you really have that ability? Sometimes empathy can be created when someone just says, as a leader, so I've got this thing and I'm doing this and I'm struggling with this, and actually this has been quite a challenge, and all of a sudden you become more like me. So I think that the opportunity for a leader to tell their story, to describe what's going on, to be more human and themselves as a whole person, could be an opportunity to start more empathetic conversations, because it takes it out of work and it creates more human. How does that sound?
I think that sounds good. And actually there's a follow-up question which I think links nicely to this, and I'm not ignoring the ones in between, I'll come back to them, but Victoria has mentioned, and I think a lot of people can resonate with this, that I'm personally a bit fed up with people keep asking me how I am, as I don't really think they're interested in the reality of how I'm feeling. So I think the question about keep saying I care is a good one. It just feels a bit rote right now. How can this be genuine as opposed to a tick box exercise?
So the thing with empathy is that there are 3 types. And actually what we're talking about here is the third type, which is called empathetic concern. So you can do the top one, which is, yeah, I get it. From a brain perspective, I get it. From the second one is, I can feel it. But the third one is, what are they going to do about that? What are they going to do about that? And in fact, I've seen something in the last couple of days where someone knew that someone had a dog because they were chatting away in the background on a Zoom call. And the leader sent them a message, which was a little, I don't know if you've seen it, I'll see if I can find it. It's a little thing that was on Twitter where there's a guy having a conference call with 2 dogs, and one dog is particularly naughty, Mabel, I think the dog is. Now, that isn't an overt expression of empathy, I care, blah, 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 blah. But subliminally, that is saying, I know you've got a dog. This is actually quite funny. I thought of you. I'm sending it to you. This might make you chuckle. Yeah. If you think about thoughtfulness, that's really where it's at. You know, I've got an example as well, super quick, where I had a conversation with someone about the song "You Are My Sunshine." I'm not going to sing it right. "You Are My Sunshine." So my mum used to sing that to me, and I was talking about it, and it was very meaningful. And 4 days later, in the post comes a jumper where those words were sewn in. Found this supplier, amazing. Thought you might like this. What? That's emotional connection, which builds up empathy. That's quite extreme, the jumper thing, but certainly here's a short clip of a man talking to 2 dogs. Hilarious and just warming, and breaks down any of those barriers.
Really good examples there. And Clive has rightly pointed out that's Andrew Cotter. And if anyone enjoys a bit of humour, check him out on YouTube, because he's produced some cracking, fun, short videos where he commentates on his 2 dogs. He is a sports commentator, golf in particular.
I have one more question. Sorry to cut across you there, Claire, but one thing I'd like to offer up to Victoria. Depending on how comfortable you feel, I wonder if you might speak up and say, would it be okay if you asked me a different question? Or do you think that we might chat about something like this, or make some suggestions to people on how they might make you feel more comfortable and more safe? I don't think that people often know what to do. They think they're doing the right thing, but there's that kind of barrier of being human versus being professional. Just wanted to offer that up.
I think that's a really important point there. It's all about how we're making people feel. Sandra, I've got a couple more questions, but I'm mindful did you have a couple more points or slides you wanted to cover first?
Just one. I think there's just one that I'm quite keen to show, and actually it's this one here. So the thing that I've noticed, certainly in the time that I've been doing this stuff, is actually around my physical health and the health of the other people on the cohort that I've been training with. So I slipped a couple of discs last summer, so I'd only just started training in this stuff. But in actual fact, since learning how to de-stress through taking those 4 breaks during the day, and how breathing is super helpful and being very mindful, we'll talk about that again in a bit, it's actually helped me quite significantly. I know that I'm far more on it. I know that I'm feeling much better and feeling happier overall. And this kind of goes far more, of course, into some of the deeper science, but there is a worry in some professions, accountancy and in law, where a lot of people get quite unwell from the degree of stress, coronary disease, blood pressure, all this type of thing. And these examples that I'm showing you here are actually around the legal profession. They have proven through studies that they've done that people who have this stuff have better mental health. They have better physical health because they're choosing to take time out to escape from the world and to come back to themselves. So I just wanted to share that before we kind of take some more questions. I'm loving this.
Fabulous, really helpful. I do have a couple of questions already teed up from you asking earlier, but people, if you've got more specific questions, please just type them in and we'll try and get to as many as we can in the time we've got. So Sophie asks, do you have any tips for working with staff who aren't emotionally intelligent and or refuse to try? Cracking question, Sophie.
Yeah, they are. And I think, so I worked with a bunch of engineers. This is some years ago now. Worked at Network Rail. I worked with a bunch of engineers, and the actual outcome was emotional intelligence. That's what we were looking for. But the way that we approached it was just some self-awareness exercises. So we got them to do some personality profiles, but the way that we sold it in was to say to them, what is your purpose? Why are you here? And they would say, oh, we're here to make this optimized and to get da, 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 da. And actually the truth was they were there to save lives. That's what they were doing. And I was saying, what if I taught you a bunch of stuff that could take us down from 9 people dying every year down to maybe 3, maybe none? How might that be? Well, that's impossible. Oh, I don't think it is. I've got some stats here that prove da, da, da. And we got them to do some personality profiling stuff. And it was like magic. It was another one of those, oh, I'm not really sure how it's going to work. But they started having different conversations. They started talking far more around how they felt nervous or anxious or worried about certain things. And then equally, they felt such pride and delight in some of the really what I would call geeky stuff. So actually, if you're able to position something that they are interested in, so for example, the fact that people can make a ton more cash, the fact that people could be promoted, perhaps that's the different angle on it. I know that some people struggle with the word emotion because emotion is vulnerable, it's scary, oh my gosh, it's going to be mistreated, and that's all to do with trust. And other people have a problem with intelligence, and that's why I guide quite a lot of people to a new book, which is about emotional agility rather than emotional intelligence. That's a book by Susan David, a South African lady. Brilliant. So I guess my point, Sophie, is can this be presented in a slightly different way so that they see a benefit in themselves? And even if you get them to move the needle just a fraction, even in feedback, there are certain methods that you might want to introduce to your team that start using some emotional intelligence principles, but no one would know.
good advice, and highly relevant, I think, for the legal sector, which is renowned for having a number of very clever expert people there that are will vary in terms of their use of emotional intelligence and sophistication. So I think that's really helpful. So what you're basically saying is it's not just warm and fluffy. There's some science, there's some data, and let's relate it to each particular individual. Sorry.
And what I was going to say was that this topic is not new. We know that this topic isn't new. You know, the actual book that Dr. Goleman wrote was back in the late 90s. And companies, I know that the size of this company might be slightly different to the size of the company that you're representing if you work for a legal firm. But a company called Baker McKenzie, they ran an EI professional program 4 years ago. They've seen a change in their performance, their profitability, and the general happiness of their staff. But here's the thing, what measures matters. And if you're not even measuring how happy and content your staff are, bringing in a program like that, how are you going to know whether it works or not? You're just going to know if people have less grievances or leave more soon. So I think, you know, you've got to think about, if you're an influencer in your business, have a conversation with people to say, you know, is it possible for us to add something in here which is about something to do with being human? And then it starts to matter. Yeah, good point. Good point.
Got a question here from Anne. Marina, no worries. Thank you for letting us know that you need to go. Multitasking, well done. There will be a recording of this session that I'll share with people, so hopefully you won't miss anything. Anne asks a really pertinent question, and if I may, Anne, I'm going to add a little bit to the question you've asked, but the broad question is the same. So when so much contact is by email, what are the best tips for demonstrating EI on email? And just taking that a stage further, we're living in this webinar and Zoom and video conferencing world. How do we make sure we can communicate in the right ways and reflect that properly?
Okay, so I'm going to take, if you can try and remember all of those, I'm going to take the first one because I do remember that. I'm working on my active listening. It's there, but my retention
Sorry, my fault.
A bit wonky. That's that multitasking thing again, Claire. So the first question around email, I think often emails start, and I actually ended up having to coach my partner on this, because emails can start quite abruptly. If you're up against a deadline, it's bish bash bosh. And he says to me, why is someone getting emotional about this email? And I read it, and it was just like punch after punch. And I said, you know, let me read this to you. I'm going to read this to you. How are you feeling about the language I'm using and the tone? Oh, yeah, right. So I think that there's something around the introduction sentence. If you know that someone's doing something or you have some background on them, you might just check in. How was that walk with your dog? How was your weekend? How is everything going? Just to bring it back to humanity. And the second thing that you might do, if you know this person, is you might use some of the language that they use. You might use some of the phraseology, or you might be showing gratitude, or you might be showing other types of encouragement, positivity within the language that you use. You know, and if the message is bad, don't beat around the bush and get it to the bottom. Be upfront with it. Be transparent about it. So I think there's a few things in there. Number one, use the greeting that you would normally do. You don't normally dive straight into a conversation. There's a bit of rapport going on. And secondly, once you've written it, read it out to yourself and just think for a moment that you're talking to one of your best mates. Would you talk to one of your best mates like that? Maybe, maybe not. And I think you might find that you might just tweak the email that you're sending. And again, as I said before, if you wanted to close that email off with a little comment around, hope you have a great weekend, or I know that you're going for a picnic this weekend, hope the weather stays great. That's really important. So have a think about that, perhaps.
I think that's very pertinent. I think I was grinning as you were explaining that. I've been the recipient of and the composer of such emails that, and as you say, they have a massive impact on us, and it's a good lesson to learn. And I think somebody mentioned on the chat earlier about how they will draft an email that might be emotionally charged and then park it, come back to it and rephrase it to make sure it's presented appropriately.
One final thing on that, actually, Anne, is the principle of emotional contagion. Emotions are contagious, and I know for a fact that, and I'm not an angel on this, but I know for a fact that when I read a particular email, and if I think it's really abrupt, all of a sudden I am feeling very annoyed, and I'm going to be sending a message back, which is exactly like that, which then creates this behavior. So here's the emotion, here's the behavior, here's the emotion back. If you think about the ripple effect that this particular email is going to create, I think you'll think more about the repercussions, because it's not just a series of words, it has an emotional result as a consequence of reading that stuff. Yeah. Just wanted to chuck that in.
Fab. Okay, we've got a couple more, which is cracking. Got some great questions coming in from everyone. Thank you. Victoria would like to know how you get a business that you work for who are not interested in staff's well-being to get on board with EI.
Oh. So would you like the abrupt answer, or would you like a very cozy answer?
Oh, I'd like both by the sounds of that, but let's take it where you need to take it, and let's see where that leads.
You might want to reevaluate whether you're in the right place. That's the abrupt, not being very coachy like. The other answer could be, how does, and again, I don't know your particular organisation, but how does the HR function, the people experience, the whatever the people thing is, show up? Has it got a place on the board? How might you find the influencers within the organisation and show them the statistics that say, when you look after your people, your numbers go up? Because if you can't relate it often to a hard number, I think a lot of this stuff is just poo-pooed as fluffy. So I think that if you are resilient and if you're up for it and you have the courage, have the conversation or create the conversation around employee welfare, and just see whether there might be just a couple of small exercises that even just one team might do. And I bet you 50 quid, yeah, I think I would go to 50 quid, that actually you'll see a slightly different mood within that small group. And with the rule of contagion, other people are going to want to know what's going on. And the reason why I say that to you is because when I worked at the National Trust, quite a small team at the time, and we worked in a completely different way to other teams. We did things quite differently. We'd go out to properties, we'd have some fun, we'd work really hard, we smashed our numbers. And membership, customer care, the volunteers are all like, what is going on? What is happening here? Because of course we're reporting at the top, and then the conversation changed. So don't give up hope or leave.
Right, I'm mindful of time. We've got 8 minutes. I've got 3 more questions, which hopefully we can get through to make sure that we've covered it all. I'm sure there's plenty more, but I'll try and get through these. So, Katrina, my role, I think this is a really pertinent one, and I think a lot of people will relate to this. My role includes client care. On occasions, there are opportunities to contact clients who might raise concerns about their experience. In these instances, fee earners shy away from allowing me to make contact. For me, it's important to acknowledge the client's experience, even if it wasn't the best, but how can I convince the fee earner that this is a good call to make?
I can certainly, after this, I can send you some stuff. The point around loyalty and the point about customer retention is about, it's been proven, emotional connection. Emotional connection, as we all know, comes from really great listening. And actually that might be the only thing you need to do. And taking some action, which may not present a risk to the business. It might even be, I'm just going to send you that article on, or I'm just going to send you, or whatever it might be. My experience of this is that the organisation is scared about the can of worms it perceives it's about to open up, which prevents it from taking that action. So I think that the business case, as it were, is loyalty and retention. So guess what, guys? We don't have to do as much acquisition. We've seen the stats. You can make between 25 and 85% more over a lifetime of a customer if you just use your EI. So I think that the argument about emotional connection has to be a reality because it's been proven, and that emotional connection can only come through you doing these things. Another legal firm is going to do this stuff. They will. Your competitors will be emotionally intelligent. They will create phenomenal client experiences, and then they're gone. And I'm hoping that that degree of fear might be the rocket that gets people to think differently. I don't know.
Good.
How do you feel about
Good
that?
point. Yeah, good question and good, well responded. I think that will be relevant to a lot of people. Rich would like to know if there are any tools like Grammarly that help to grade content in a form of EI, and even if there are, do you not recommend them? E.g., do they do the job properly and well?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think, I believe, and I haven't done all my research on this, Rich, I think the only tool in town at the moment is Grammarly, because it's giving you a gauge on the tonality of your message. But the thing here is that only you really will know whether you are connecting correctly, because while it might be through the algorithm, that's funky, that's smiley, that's fun, is it right for the audience who's about to receive it? And I'm not aware of any AI at the moment that can do that stuff, because actually what you'll be looking at is a bunch of data about the individual who's receiving the message, a bunch of data about you, and then the context of the message itself. Although saying that, one quick thing I'm going to offer up as a bit of the world is changing. Many of you may know of the messaging email type thing, which is called Slack. Some of you may have heard of Slack. So there are AI machinery now, bots that are reading all the messages that people send and creating a personality profile through collating all of that data. So if I'm chatting away in a whole variety of different channels on Slack, out will pop, Sandra's mostly like this. So when you speak to her, you might want to make sure you say this stuff. So it doesn't mean to say that something isn't on the horizon, Rich, but I think we need to use our human instincts to get it right for that individual, because that's where rapport happens, as we know.
Thank you for that. Helpful.
Welcome.
Great. So one more question for you before we're going to just wrap things up. So, and I love this, Sean. I think, again, we can relate to this. When I was a newly qualified litigator, I used to get a buzz out of confrontation with opponents. It fueled my energy and I felt there was a need to win every point against them. And that drove me on. Now I'm older. I find that confrontation just gets on my nerves and winds me up. Is there an EI approach which would help me find a happy medium?
Conflict management is one of the competencies within the Goleman framework, and that will only come once you have your self-awareness, because only then will you recognize what's going on within you and you can see what's happening with the other person. So there's a few things here. Firstly, you need to decide what your intention is for that meeting or that conversation. What do you want to get out of it? How do you want it to go so that it's not getting on your nerves and it doesn't wind you up? And if you think about that, you're going to think about, actually, I could be quite vehement about this, or actually, I think that they might be interested in these things. So again, through active listening, you might use some language back that they've used with you. You might recap what they've said so they feel really heard. And what I've read is that when you play back what someone's said in your own synthesis, the person thinks that, yeah, actually, you're kind of on my side. You've kind of got my back. It's an interesting psychology. So I think there's an opportunity for you to use techniques that will reduce the confrontation, but you've got to be clear on what you want to get out of it. You might actually check in with their expectations. So that shows that you're not against one another. You're trying to figure it out together. And then using techniques like playing back, synthesizing, asking them, and just really listening, that might help. Be very interesting, actually, Sean, if you try some of those things, and let's have a report back on how that went.
Thank you. Right, I'm going to stop asking questions there because we are 2 minutes to the hour. Sandra, that has been absolutely amazing and fabulous, and you can tell by the number of questions that have come in that's been really engaging and captured people's attention. And you've given some really so much information and data to support it, and information to sort of say here's why it matters. But fundamentally, this isn't fluffy. It helps the bottom line. It helps with clients. It helps with careers and building stronger relationships. So there's some really good reasons. And I like the saying soft skills, hard cash. I think that's quite a nice little takeaway. Couple of things to finish off, people. I have recorded most of this session. I managed to not hit record until after I'd done my introduction. So the good news is you don't have to listen to me waffling on about what we're going to cover. You can just get straight to the good stuff with Sandra talking to you, and I will share that with you after this call. Paul has reminded me from Paul, sorry, let me just find it, from Insight 6. They are offering, and I'm just trying to find it, they do a number of different measurements to help firms measure client satisfaction, and I know they've got some specific tools they've developed in recent weeks, so contact Insight 6 if that would be of help to you. Sandra, if somebody wants to, if they're interested in taking some of this stuff forward, i.e. how can we actually use some of this stuff, what are the practical steps we can take, how can they do that?
Few things. First of all, now I have my badge. We're going to be running some just 1 hour emotion intelligence sessions with whoever wants to get in contact. They're free because I'm on a mission to get people to understand what emotion intelligence really is. So that's one option. We can facilitate a conversation with as many people from the organisation as they wish. We'll run it on Zoom. We'll use some other techniques to get guys thinking differently. Secondly, if you want to reach out, I'm on LinkedIn. If you find a Sandra Johnson where it starts CX educator, that'll be me, and maybe looking a bit like this. Other than that, I'll include some other exercises potentially at the back of the deck that you might want to think about that we send out, because you can do as much or as little as you wish.
Brilliant. We are 12:01, so apologies everyone. I'm 1 minute over this time. I was 8 minutes last time. Sandra, some really lovely comments coming up in the chat that are showing their appreciation. So absolutely fabulous. Thank you everybody for your time, and a big thank you, Sandra, for sharing such interesting and valuable material. We will share Sandra's slides as well as the recording, and Sandra mentioned a couple of little extras of bits and bobs she'll share, so we'll get those to you. Thank you so much everybody.
Thank you everyone.
Take care, have a great day.
Thanks again.